I guess we should officially start then. Okay. For those who don't know, I'm Zero. I'm really sorry for how this stream started out. But for those who are familiar with this stream, tech difficulties happen a lot. And usually I have a tech guy who will come in and help me, but not today. He's gone into his work office because it's Monday for us here in New Zealand. Anyway, this is my stream. Zero does stuff because I'm Zero and I does stuff, mostly along the RPG lines. And today I have a special guest. We have Vahid from Dice Legends.
Thank you so much for having me with you, Sarah.
Thank you for agreeing to be on and suffering my tech issues. But know that you are not the only one who suffers them so.
No, no. There's a special joy that comes with them, isn't there?
In a panic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know what? Most TV shows or radio stations or whatever have huge tech teams behind them. And we are, one-armed paper hangers trying to do everything all by ourselves.
Well, you usually have a guy at least who drives your
Yeah,
OBS and your sound and everything. Nope, just me, just me. And you have
exactly.
moderators, but again, my moderators, I have a few of them, but none of them are here, so it's just me.
Sure.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so should we get this started? Tell us, Vahid, who is Vahid? Who are you?
Right. Right. To start off, so people know who I am. So my name is Vahid. I've been playing D&D for a very long time. I've been streaming a relatively short time. We have a channel called Dice Legends, and I am the producer of that show and the DM of that show.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also a New Zealand-based streaming show, just like yours, Sarah. And all of our cast members are from the TV and theater world here in New Zealand, and we film out of a studio here in New Zealand, live on the weekend. That's what we do. I've been playing D&D since I was a child, and have played every single edition of the game. And here we are doing 5th edition, and have taken that nerdy, beautiful pastime and gone into the super nerd version of actually streaming it as well, which is a special type of nerddom, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see it as being nerdy anymore. It's actually become quite cool and mainstream. Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons and other tabletop RPGs, right?
it certainly has, for sure.
I mean, especially when you have shows like Critical Role that are actually now being, you can go watch some of the episodes in a movie theater. I mean, that's got to be mainstream, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right, indeed.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of other things that were considered geeky and nerdy are also very mainstream. Comic books and computer games, they used to be considered nerdy as well, but not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the geek shall inherit the earth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that's the title of a book or something somewhere. Dixon says we became cool as soon as the jocks realized that fantasy football is just their version of D&D.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a stream where you stream D&D and you have a wealth of experience playing D&D. So you're probably the best person to ask about how on earth one makes a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Because I've only ever made one myself. And I just made that shit up as I went, basically.
Nice. I
I'm
love it.
not a planner. I had a pantheon in a little town, and that was about it. We just went by the seat of our pants for everything else. But, yeah, a bit
Sure.
more structure is probably a good idea, I think.
Structure is valuable at some point. I don't think it has to be structured to begin with, but the more you have structure, the more the world feels real and cohesive.
Hmm.
So I think, generally speaking, and these are just opinions, of course.
Oh, yeah, this is your point of view.
This is my point of view
Yep.
and how I like to do it. Some people love to start with the big macro stuff,
Hmm.
like creation mythology and pantheons and or world politics or that kind of stuff, or big global maps. And I generally tend to start on the other side of things,
Mm-hmm.
where I generally try to start with the characters and a germ of a plot idea, and then extrapolate from that, and then create the world around that.
Mm.
So, and there are advantages both ways,
Mm-hmm.
but because I've come from my paid employment has been for most of my working life in the television industry. And one of the things that you hear over and over again is character is key, and that the character is at the heart of story, and that everything should naturally merge from character. And so, from that perspective, what I usually like doing is having a germ of an idea and then sharing what that germ of the idea is with the players,
Mm-hmm.
getting the players to create some characters, and then from that, then start building the bigger world. That's a very, very rough approach.
That's actually how I approached it with that one time I came up with homebrew for my D&D campaign. So yeah, I feel vindicated already.
So, for example, at one point I wanted to do the germ of the idea was I just wanted to do a giant hunting campaign. And it was with a bunch of guys that really are there for combat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so therefore the germ of the idea was, hey guys, we're going to do a giant hunting campaign. And the idea in my mind was we start with smallish giant kind, ogres, and we gradually build up. And it was very simple. And then once they made characters, then it was a case of figuring out, well, okay, well, what's going on in the world that this is a problem? Why are there giants? And then it's kind of extrapolating it from there.
Awesome. Awesome. So what was the germ of the idea that you had for Dice Legends, or would it be a spoiler if you shared
Oh no,
that
no,
with
that's all good.
us?
Hi, Samantha, Vito. That's great to have you here. Um, isn't it nice when people are generous, Sarah?
Yeah, it's nice to have a Dixon around, as you guys probably found out yesterday.
Yeah, Dixon was so kind yesterday. That was brilliant. Hey, so Dice Legends. So the germ of the idea was that I really wanted to have I wanted to play with. So look, there were just two core concepts, germs of ideas that I wanted to play with.
Mm-hmm.
So I took to the cast members. We had a cast meeting before we started streaming. I took these two germs of an idea and then we brainstormed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the germs of the idea were I wanted it to be a relatively low magic setting to stand out because a lot of the streams that I was watching, it was highly magical.
Yeah.
Lots of lots of things going on. And also I was really fascinated at the time by the city of Constantinople, which you might have heard me talk about
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
And so I was really keen to explore a setting that was in a grand walled city where most of the adventure would take place within a city that would allow for the subplots and NPCs and minor characters to actually always be around the PCs. Because I had experienced many times that when going on epic adventures, usually you leave the place that you started. Like if you start in a village, you leave the village,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of those kind of subplot elements get left behind as well. And I didn't want that. So with those two base concepts of low magic setting and in a grand walled city, which was an ethnic kind of melting pot, we then threw around brainstormed some ideas. And one of the ideas that the players really liked, of many ideas that we threw around, was having a setting where they were, rather than starting off as heroic figures, that they were town guards.
Mm-hmm.
And so then from that, it was a case of, once we decided that, they went away and made their characters. And all of a sudden, once they made their characters, then the world started to be fleshed out in more detail. So all of a sudden, okay, one of them wants to be magical, even though we said it's a low magic setting. All right, well, how's that going to work? How are we going to regulate the magic? And one of them wanted to have a heritage, a kind of a so the character Hakapello wanted to have some kind of heritage story, and so we had to work in that. Yeah, so each of the characters then brought elements which fleshed out the world more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Didn't have any pantheon before we had. Nimrod said she wanted to be a cleric, and then all of a sudden we had to figure out what was she going to be a cleric for, and then start to figure out. And so that's how the world started to be built up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 That's pretty much how I did it with my one. It was I kind of came up. Well, I started with a pantheon and a blank map of a walled city as well in this instance. And it was, I went, what kind of characters are you creating? So there was a nobleman, there was this person who was not from the city, from far away, who was coming in and visiting. There was also a cleric from the who was in the poorer parts, so we had to create a rich noble area, the poor section. And also I left a lot of it up to the players about their family and stuff like that. But when as soon as one of them said, "Oh yes, I was left at the it seems to be quite common, a cleric being left as a baby in a basket in front of a temple kind of thing."
Oh, nice.
I was like, I now can control your biological parents, right? You can create your adopted family. I now have a story reason and important
Yeah, that's right.
NPCs I
Yeah.
can work in, kind of
Yeah,
like that.
brilliant. Yeah, yeah. I love it. Yeah, and I think that then once we have characters and we have this the germ of a setting and an idea, then the next thing to figure out is, well, what's the story?
Mm.
You know? And I think the characters will most of the time inform that story. But, where's the threat? What's going to drive adventure? What's going to take these characters? In the novel writing world, they talk about, you start with the protagonist,
Mm-hmm.
and then the author's job is to stick them up a tree and for the character to figure out how to get back down from the tree. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
And
Our previous guest, Susanna Lewis, said exactly that. They're up a tree, and then there's sharks circling that tree. How are they going to get down? Kind of thing. Yeah.
exactly. And so then it's a case of figuring out, well, what is that threat? What is the motivation? What's going to motivate these characters in a realistic way? I don't know if realistic is necessarily the right word for Dungeons and
Mm-hmm.
Dragons. In a compelling way.
Yeah.
What's going to motivate the characters so that they will want to go on this adventure, to be
Mm-hmm.
self-sacrificing and heroic and all that.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. The individual motivation, because as we've seen on Dice Legends, they all have some very unique motivations for doing anything, and sometimes they change over time
That's
too,
right.
which is interesting.
Which I love. I love the way that you know, character isn't set in stone, and that the effects of the adventure should change the character. Every character should have a plot arc,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and which is why first movies are usually better than second movies, because the plot arc for a character
Yeah.
has usually had a really satisfying movement in a first movie, but then it's really hard to figure out what to do with that character in next movies.
Yeah. Because they will, in theory, they need to change again in order for the
That's
second
right.
one to be successful.
Yeah. And how do you do that without losing your audience? How do you do that in a way where the character still has the aspects of it that attracted the audience in the first place?
Because I
So
guess
one of the things that I like, go ahead, please, Sarah,
no,
go.
no, no. You keep going.
So one of the things I like to do when considering the threat of the world is try to figure out antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
And so fairly early on, trying to figure out who are the antagonists. If our heroes are the protagonists that are going to drive the story, who are the antagonists that are going to drive the story? And because conflict is often between the goals of the protagonist and the goals of the antagonist. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so it's then about defining who those antagonists are.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that sometimes, and I feel that I've found that there are 4 tiers of antagonists,
Ooh.
and it's possible to start with any one of those tiers.
Okay.
You
What are
ready for
they?
this?
Yeah, yeah. I'm taking notes.
Okay. So these are just the ramblings of a deranged mind. Okay, so
It's the same of any DM, isn't it? I mean,
so, and my feeling is that of these 4 levels of antagonists, each of them needs to have um, some some way of being unique, something that helps them stand out and be memorable, right?
yeah.
Uh, so the first one is the chief. Oh, not the chief, the mastermind. Let's call it a mastermind.
Okay.
Right? The person who is ultimately the big bad guy, the person who's ultimately the biggest threat to the protagonist's world.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is driving things, and you can set that up at the beginning or later on with the characters figuring out that how the players interact with that mastermind is, of course, really important part of the story. The next tier are the lieutenants, and the lieutenants or captains. Um, they are the ones that are serious. They still have motivation. They're still like truly our characters, and that they need to have personality traits. They need to have ways that they can manipulate the story as well. They have some of their own interest, and the lieutenant's interest and the mastermind's interest mostly are aligned, but don't necessarily always have to be aligned. So so that they're still significant threats to the PCs. And then the next layer down are the beefed up mooks, or super mooks,
Super mooks. Okay.
super mooks, right?
Yeah.
So those are um, your gladiator chief or your bugbear chief or mid bosses, says Dixon. So these guys need to have something cool going for them, but they're not usually the brains of the operation. We don't need to carry too much. Their role in the adventure is to create tension, to create combat and adventure, and then the bottom layer is just mooks. The rank and
Minions.
file
Minions.
minions. Yeah, minions. I like that.
It's a monster of
And
the week term. You've got your monsters and then you've got your minions.
exactly. And the minions, their whole job is to get in the way, right? And to carry out the whims of anyone who's above them. And with them, we might give them monikers and descriptors but we don't care too much about them. usually. So we might call them. We might call one Baldy, and we might call one jade earrings, or so we have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
kind of identifier to them, but they come and they go
Yeah.
unless there's something that happens in the adventure that captures a spark of either the players or the DM, and then they get promoted to being a super mook and develop some personality.
Yeah, because I mean, they could just be a regular everyday minion until they encounter the heroes, and then something just makes them motivated to move up those ranks and really give it to those heroes later on. They could become the true BBEG by the end of the whole campaign. You never know.
Exactly. One of the campaigns that I ran with some family members, they were going through a goblin area, and as I've mentioned in other streams, I love goblins. And the PCs decided that it was actually a really good idea to capture one of these goblins, whose job was a minion, but they captured the goblin, and to extract information, and bribed it with a few copper pieces, and all of a sudden the minion had a personality.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yep.
was then instantly, because of the player's interaction, became upgraded to a super mook. Yeah. So anyway, in terms of antagonists, I usually think of non-playing characters that are antagonists in terms of those four kind of layers.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you encourage? What's the best way to say this? Because the characters, they might also have some existing rivalry with an NPC. Would you make them fall into one of these four tiers, or wait
Right.
and see what happens until they're actually encountered in game before they get a tier level?
Yeah, look, so these are when I talk about antagonists, and of course, then there's a whole other. So in my mind, the whole idea of the antagonists are to drive the plot forward, to drive the characters to need to do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to create threat in the world or in the lives of the people that they love, or something like that. That their whole purpose is to drive story forward, to create crises so that the PCs get off their butts and do something about it.
Right.
But that there's a whole new other realm, which are the side characters who are neither antagonists or protagonists. They're just in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's like antagonists are a specific type of NPC, and then there's all the other significant NPCs, and they also have their part into it. So they're not necessarily antagonists, but they're important to the story. So those are things like family members, or
Yep.
colleagues, or um, love interests, or rivals. I love rivals. Rivals are so
Mm-hmm.
much fun.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and they provide a whole bunch of other things. Most notably, they provide someone to get into danger.
Ah. Yes. Yeah. For those who come from a Monster of the Week background, those who would come into danger would be known as bystanders. And as you know, any bystander has the potential to become a victim.
Exactly. Exactly. The princess is in another castle. Exactly, Mehdi. Yeah. And I think those NPCs, when we're talking about world building, are really, really crucial for the world to feel a bigger place, and that there's other things going on.
Mm.
And they bring something else to the story, which is they bring heart to the story. And they bring a reason for the players to want to do something. Um, and you need to have non-playing characters that the audience loves and dislikes. You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, building those non-playing characters that the audience will feel really aggrieved if they are hurt, or non-playing characters that they will feel, serves them right.
Okay.
I hear you typing furiously.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that those it can be, but one of the things that I've really seen, especially like in our show, is if you want the audience to feel a connection to a character, then you have to give them screen time.
Yeah.
If you if someone has a if you just suddenly say, "Oh yeah," and your mother has just been grabbed by some trolls, but the audience has never met the mother, they'll go, "Oh, that's terrible," but they won't really feel it until you've had scenes with the mother, and you've figured out, and the audience grows to love that character. That's when you can then really, really start manipulating the emotions and putting them under threat.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. So for the campaign, we have gem of an idea, bringing in the
Yeah.
characters so they can help grow the world.
Mm.
The threat was the four tiers of antagonists and NPCs. What else do we need for a campaign? Is there?
Sure. I think you need to define. Well, look, this is my own feeling is that it's in Dungeons and Dragons, at least. There's a lot of then big blocks that one can then start working with. It's the first one of the big questions that I always ask myself is, okay, well, from the mundane to epic, where is this campaign? Um, yeah, how do we want this to feel? If it's and both have advantages. So what's the canvas that this adventure is going to take place in? Is it a big, sprawling, epic adventure? Is it a small, intimate adventure?
Hmm.
And that makes a difference because if you're doing an intimate adventure, you might only need to really start off with one village and a local mine or, the forest nearby. You don't necessarily need to have a lot if it's a small intimate campaign. And so you might not have any map of the world at all other than what you need. But if it's a big epic geopolitical thing, of course you're going to need to have the world building right from the beginning needs to have, you know, I don't know if the DM actually needs to have a map, but it has to have an idea of how the nations and the geopolitical stuff works, and you need to know the pantheons. So the bigger the more epic it is, I think the more work there is for Dungeon Master to try to flesh everything out.
Which do you prefer, personally?
Well, in our core Dice Legends story, I thought we were going to be small and intimate, but we ended up being epic. So, yeah. I think both. I love both. I think it's good to start off small.
Hmm.
There's more emotional stakes when things are small than when things are big. In my own, again, in my own deranged mind. I really like it when the stakes are relatable. It's that classic superhero movies where the world's going to be blown up every single movie, right?
Yeah.
And I actually don't feel any sense of threat from it anymore. Whereas I remember watching a movie, and then what was a movie? It was a Sean Connery movie. I can't remember what it was called, but it was about two young teenagers, and one was an author, an aspiring author. And in one scene, they were just doing basketball shots to see who could make it into the basketball team.
Yeah, I think I know this one, yeah.
And there was more tension in that scene of these two teen boys trying to outdo each other and get into the basketball team by throwing free throws. There was more tension in that scene than in the entire Doctor Strange multiverse movie that I watched a little while ago.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's because there was a relatability to it or something. Anyway, so to go back to your question, I really like small scale things, especially at the beginning when you're establishing relationships and that kind of stuff. And then I think you can go big after that. If you start big, there's nowhere to go. It's harder to go
Yeah.
bigger.
Especially if you start with, well, a world-ending event, they're mine.
That's right.
Yeah.
And look, world-ending events are cool. That's core Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But if you start with that, where are you going to go? Right? It's You have to build up to that.
Yeah, that's what happens at level 20, right? Surely.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. And they have to. Yeah, Dixon got the name of the movie for me, Finding Forrester. Yeah, thank you.
It's a great movie.
Yeah. So those are some thoughts along the way in terms of world building. Some of the things that um, having said that, there's some things that I don't usually spend a lot of time on that other people think are important, but I don't consider that important into stories. And those are some logistical things, like economic things. I don't really care about that. Whereas I know other people, for example, a friend of ours, Rob Hartley, he really likes economic systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool. And he works that into his games great, but that's not something that moves me. So I don't bother so much on that. Um, I don't ask for players to keep track of how much food they have when they go traveling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that if a character has create water, then they're gonna survive. And
Create food and water. That's how you end up with a ton of bagels. Yep. Every time the cleric just had bagels. It's
love
hilarious.
it. Yeah, and if a ranger can cast Goodberry, right? At second level, a ranger can supply food for 10 people every day with Goodberry. So things like that I think mean that I don't like sweating the small stuff in campaigns, even if it's an intimate one.
Oh, you're so refreshing. Because I find people, it's usually, I don't want to stereotype, but in my experience, it's usually been guys who have come from playing the older versions of the games who are very much into that kind of miniature, you've got this much water, you've got this many rations, you need a healer's kit to hit, all that kind of thing. They're the ones who are big into that, so it's so refreshing having someone like you go, stuff's not important.
Yeah, not here to be counting glasses of water, are we? Yeah, we want to get to the adventure, and you know, again, in the TV world, I think this is actually the theater world. One of the things they say is drama is ordinary life with the boring bits chopped out.
Yeah,
So why sweat that kind of stuff?
yeah, yeah. It's yeah, especially for if you're on a stream too. I mean, that's not going to be interesting for the audience, really.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
brother. Yeah.
yeah. So then, in terms of world building, what I do like to do, I think one of the most important things to do before launching the story, um, is based on this concept that character is at the heart of things, is to try to figure out, all right, I can't control what the player characters are going to do and what their motivation is,
Yep.
right?
Yep. No.
And I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is that they're driving the story ultimately. But I do want to know what the motivation of all these top layer NPCs are. Whether they're ordinary NPCs like family members, rivals, love interest,
Mm-hmm.
etc., or a monarch, for example, or if they are the antagonists. I want to know. So often, when thinking between campaigns, between sessions, most of the world building comes from thinking, okay, based upon what's just happened, right? Um, we've got a brand new monarch on the throne. What's their motivation?
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to be doing? And so I think it's really valuable to think all of those upper tier NPCs, what's going on for them? And then from that, to start building whatever aspects of the world are needed. So, um, if a lord of the local manor has just been killed, well, what are the implications um, for the monarchy or for their family, and then figuring out the world building from that. And that's often how I've end up finding out how the monarchy works, is because someone dies. but
Mm-hmm.
uh, but anyway, like if there's a love interest, well, what is the love interest doing between adventures?
Yeah.
What are they? And if it's something significant, then great. If it's not, then that's fine. Rivals. What are the rivals doing? What are the rivals doing that's going to be irksome to the audience and to the PCs? Well, that probably is going to mean that we need to create some world stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting when players don't yet realize that things are happening when they're not around. So when they're reminded of this with the consequences of something that's happened or finding this out, that they seem quite shocked. And they're like, oh no, this is something else we have to now think about. What's going on when we're not around? You know? And
Yeah,
I've
that's
seen
right.
that a few times on Dice Legends, and it's always as a DM, it's always so fun to see them react to that moment of shock where they're like, "Oh shit, we forgot about that," or they've
Yeah,
decided to go somewhere else, but the thing that they also had a choice to do is still happening, and there's now
yeah,
consequences for not having been there. It's
yes.
delicious.
Having moral quandaries is really wonderful. I have so giving players clear motivation of wanting to go one direction, but them knowing that they can't be in two places at once, that if they do this, then they can't do this other thing. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Creating that kind of sense of ambivalence or second guessing themselves. Yeah, I love that stuff. As long as it doesn't paralyze them into indecision. But yeah.
Oh, indecision. Oh my god. I've got one of those players. 10 minutes to decide anything, and it's a running joke. Don't give him a decision. Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. Dixon has suggested the love interest is secretly the sub boss. Whoa. Do you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Like
Or they
one of the,
appear to be an antagonist, but they're not really an antagonist. It's just because they need to do something. It just seems like they're a bad guy, but they're doing it for the right reasons, kind of thing. Or just flipping these things on their assumptions on the head is such a nice
yeah.
little plot twist.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Without doing too many spoilers, in the third act of our show, the heroes went off to do some treasure hunting because they needed to collect some items. And there was a significant non-playing character that was introduced, which was a love interest. And I loved how the other player characters really distrusted her. Completely distrusted her, disliked her, didn't want her to be around. And then as they gradually got to understand other things about her, they felt this huge conflict because they've been holding on to so much antagonism towards her for so many sessions.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, a change of perspective meant that they're, oh, hang on, wait, maybe, yeah. But is she trustworthy? And I just love playing with their emotions like that.
Yeah. Well, the NPC that because you've obviously it's happened a lot on Dice Legends because the majority of the players very new to D&D, so they don't know the usual tricks or expectations from a DM, so they will just believe every NPC is a good person, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
then
Yeah.
that sense of betrayal really hits them when they realize, hang
I
on, they
love
can
it.
lie? What? You know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And when we're talking about world building and NPCs, I think it's really valuable to consider that there will be non-playing characters who have their own vested interests that are different from the player character's interests, but they're not necessarily bad guys.
Yeah.
And that adds a whole layer of dramatic tension. That these people, these player characters are people that they might even admire, but they're doing things that the player characters are either getting in their way or they're messing things up or breaking things or undermining them. But you just can't go out and take a sword to them.
I mean, you could,
You
but
could, and
there are repercussions and consequences to that. So, yeah.
yeah,
It's just realizing that there are consequences, I think, is also brilliant, too.
yeah, yeah. And I think one of the other big major things about making a campaign, if we're talking about making a campaign,
Yeah.
when I think one of the trickiest things, and this is kind of a new heading, really, because we've talked a lot about characters and how characters interact, and how character is really at the heart of things. And then the next thing is to consider story elements and plot elements and the unfolding of plot. And that's a different art to characterization. And because if we're talking about a mini D&D campaign,
Yeah.
It's really helpful to try to figure out how many sessions do I think this is going to be.
Yeah, with someone like me, I have no idea because, like I said, we just kind of play to find out and I let them go wild.
Yeah.
So, this is something I would like to know. How do you make that happen? Or how do you
Indeed.
know how long that might take?
Indeed. That's I think that's a really interesting thing to explore in this storytelling medium because it's different from writing a story, isn't it? Where you're a novelist or a playwright or a screenwriter, then you have complete sole control over the story. But when you're doing D&D, you don't. At least we don't want the DM to, do we? We want the players to have control.
Yeah.
So, but it's one of the things that's well, for myself, what I do is I try to figure out, roughly speaking, how long do I want the campaign to be? So with our main Dice Legends one, for example, I had anticipated that I want the campaign to start at level 1 and to ultimately be an 18 month to 2 year total story.
Okay. So you're about roughly halfway through.
So we are halfway through.
Mm.
Yeah. And the players have just hit level 9. So on that kind of epic scale thing, then that's kind of tracking well. Whereas with the little mini series that we're running right now, that we started just yesterday,
Yeah.
I knew that we only had until mid-December, and that the campaign needs to have a satisfying beginning, middle, and end to finish on the 5th episode. But then
Yeah.
it got changed because I got COVID, and then all of a sudden I had to truncate it into a 4 episode miniseries.
Okay.
So that requires different kind of, that does require a bit more um, plot kind of thinking, really. So the way that I think it's useful to think of that is that I know where it's going to begin. I don't know exactly where it's going to end, but I know that the the machinations of the main antagonist are leading towards this final point over here.
Okay. Right. Gotcha.
But right, so I don't know exactly where it's going to be, exactly how it's going to happen, but I know that the the plot driving from the antagonist, from the mastermind antagonist, is to culminate at a moment here. Now, what the player characters do to change that or prevent that, I can't completely control. But I often see this story is kind of like, see if I can do a shape like this. That it starts here, it goes, and I have no idea where it's going to go, but ultimately it's going to come together at a satisfying climactic point.
Mm-hmm.
The fine details of which are not as important as the kind of emotional and character convergence.
Right. So
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. I just really want to go back to that. How you've got, especially in terms of a smaller campaign, that the plot is really driven from the plot movement is really driven from the mastermind, the antagonist's point of view, from where they're starting to where they want it to end. This is, again, I can go back to Monster of the Week and explain that we have what is called a countdown, where it's each, you assume that the heroes have never gotten involved. The countdown is the main monster's movements from just starting to whatever its main goal is. So that's in a sense it's a very similar way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And one of the, I think for a short campaign, um, a time limit is a really important mechanic.
Yeah.
So, um, for example, yesterday in the campaign, right at the beginning, I can say in this mini series, I can say this because it happened in the first half hour of the first episode of the mini series, so it's not a spoiler. But it was explained that a significant non-playing character was giving our heroes a mission that started at sunset and had to be completed at sunrise the next morning.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was really clear time frame
Uh-huh.
that our story was going to take place in.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't even notice at the beginning. I thought that, oh, okay, this will just be the time frame for this one session. So by the end of the session, they'll have gotten the albeit, the
Yeah,
MacGuffin to the location. But it turns out it's for the whole campaign. So you've now got a whole lot of wacky rides and guest stars
exactly.
coming in to
Yeah,
get the MacGuffin to the final destination at dawn.
that's right.
So it's really
Exactly.
only a 12-hour, if that.
Right, it's a
campaign.
12-hour story,
Yeah.
which means no long rests.
Ah. Also, now I see why you had the audience interaction mechanic of boosting
Yeah.
HP.
Otherwise, they all gonna die.
Yeah. Gotcha. Interesting.
And then it's a case of, okay. So then it's a case of still needing to motivate. If we're looking at a mini campaign,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I had, in this particular example, and I can't go into a lot of details because we've only just done the first one,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew I had 4 episodes to do this in.
Yeah.
And I knew I needed to have the world that it would take place in was going to be the criminal underbelly of the city.
Yeah.
And so we had a whole bunch of the city that had already been built around, but there's a whole bunch of locations and people that I wanted to have already created, so that when we're going into locations. Sorry, I should stick with story elements. I'll stick with story elements, and then we'll go to set dressing.
Okay.
To so so then with the story elements,
Mm-hmm.
it was about creating a beginning, middle, and an end, and that there needs to have a satisfying reason for the characters to start.
Yeah.
And in this case, the motivator for Raylene's character is personal redemption.
Yeah.
That she needs to prove herself. So she has a motivation. Ronnie's character also has a motivation, but that hasn't come to the fore as much yet.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was gonna say I haven't recognized his yet. So.
But at the moment, it's really clear that Raylene's character has a motivation to succeed in the mission, isn't
Mm-hmm.
it?
Yeah. Definitely.
And so then it's a case of messing that up, from a DM's point of view, is making that hard, making it so that if it happens, it is more satisfying.
Yeah.
And and so then the way that I'm approaching this particular mini series with only 4 episodes
Mm-hmm.
is to have each of the episodes have a distinctly some specific story flavor. So the first episode, for example, I called The Rescue, and it was all about rescue kind of dynamics.
Yeah.
But you'll see in the next episode, I can tell you is called The Gauntlet, and so it will have different kind of story elements, that come along with those kind of stories. Anyway, and then ultimately what you want is the motivator, the subplot that creates the characters wanting to do the mission, and you want the A plot of the actual mission itself to have a satisfying convergence in the climax at the end of the final episode, obviously. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Okay. This is a lot more like writing than you would think.
Sorry, I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I'm not a novelist, but I used to write novellas, so I
Did
guess that could
you?
be a short campaign. Yeah, yeah. I'm not releasing my pen names either. It's too embarrassing. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So in terms of sessions, planning a session. So yeah, what do you want to cover next? Do you want to cover, because there's other world building stuff that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about, populating the locations of the world. We haven't talked about planning a session in a Manny campaign. What do you want to do?
I think probably in this instance we should probably do the bigger part of the locations and then go down for the individual sessions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Because I think the whole idea of leading up to the miniseries that we started yesterday, I did a month's worth of streaming from time to time about world building, of creating the environment
Mm-hmm.
that in the writing world they call it the milieu, right?
Mm-hmm.
The and so now that I know that you're a novella writer, that's cool. And so I think the purpose of those of creating locations, setting stuff, is to make the world feel lived in
Yeah.
and interesting. I think those are really important. To yeah, that there's a bigger world than just the players. You know, that there's a world to explore, and that, and I think it is important that each location is interesting, has something unique about it, something that will pique the interest of the audience and of the players.
Yeah.
Thing, because ultimately you want a location that they can interact with and create something themselves out of.
Yeah. So is that what you do? You come up with some locations and you find something that would be interesting to the players. Like, for
Yeah,
example, could we talk about in Aratai, the city of Aratai, you have the stacks.
yeah,
Would that be considered?
exactly.
Yeah. How did you make? For those who are not yet familiar with the stacks or dice legends, you tell us a little bit about how
Thank you.
you came up with that.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
made that
Right.
piquing interest?
Okay, so Aratai is an arid environment. Yeah,
Okay.
so so it's a dry, warm environment. So so in a dry, warm environment, you don't get a lot of trees, right?
Right.
So what's going to be the easiest building material? Stone.
Yeah.
And so um, stone isn't, and so I decided early on in Aratai that the cheapest building material is going to be stone, and so that the cheapest area of the town, the stacks, people would be so poor that they might not even be able to afford mortar sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that they would just be really a case of stacking rocks and the small amount of wood that they had or tarpaulins to create roofs and things. And so you have this organic ramshackle place.
Mm-hmm.
The very poorest people would live in this place that if there was a big earthquake, it would just end in thousands and thousands of deaths. You know, and I had just before we started um, started streaming about this time last year. I had the honor of being overseas in Israel and seeing what buildings are like when stone is your cheapest building material.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because here in New Zealand there's wood, jibboard. Jibboard used to be the cheapest building material, but so so that was like the starting point of the okay, how do people make their houses? All right, well, where do people get their food? How do people get their water? How do they socialize? And so then it was a case of building up things out of that. If water, if it's an arid place and they have to get the water from rivers or from wells, okay, so how does that impact on the society? So those kind of things
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really interested in. And one example of a location that I thought was going to be really interesting and turned out to be interesting is I wanted to create a bar fight, but and this was way back in like episode 6 or something, so I can say this without spoiling too much. But I didn't want it to be in a bar because I thought in places like this they actually have tea rooms, and so created a tea room, and there were some kebabs there, and all of a sudden the players had a whole bunch of props that they could play with
Yeah.
it piqued their interest because it was a different kind of take on a bar fight. And all of a sudden, they were picking up greasy pigs. They were using kebab skewers as things to poke people in the rumps, and they were pouring cups of tea on each other. All of a sudden, they were using the environment to enhance the story. So I think that's what it comes down to in building locations, is that we want to have something that the players will interact with.
Okay. And they did go crazy in that one, I gotta say. It was hilarious.
Indeed.
Yeah, they just went back wild. Oh, we're having a fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're having a fight.
And thankfully for me, that ended up having implications for the broader plot as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Which was brilliant. Yeah, so that's locations and settings. I think it's about making the world feel lived in and interesting.
Okay.
But you can do that gradually. You don't have to do everything at once. You just build it up slowly, slowly, slowly.
One location at a time, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And as you said, each location has something unique about it that piques the interest of the players, and then they'll want to go back, or when they go back, they'll remember the place, and starts feeling like a cool world.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's good. All right. So, how do we do a session?
So running sessions and campaigns. I'm sorry, this is going to sound like writing a novel again. TV is even more brutal than writing about this. In movies and TV, they say every scene has to have a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So I think as a DM, then that's where we can really help move the story forward, is to be really clear about what is the purpose of every scene. And sometimes those scenes are to expand character, sometimes they're to advance plot, sometimes they're both. Sometimes they're to, introduce danger or threat. A whole bunch of reasons. Sometimes they're just to expand the world and to give us a bigger impression of the world. So there's different reasons for why you can have a scene.
Yeah.
Some are a really important one is to set the stakes, to establish the stakes. And my favorite example of that is the animated Mulan movie.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with it at all?
No, I've not seen that one, but I'm sure the audience has.
So the very first scene in Mulan is of the Mongols attacking the Great Wall. And Mulan isn't in it at all.
Yeah.
None of the heroes are in it. It's them attacking, and what it shows how formidable the enemy is, and that the enemy is about to invade into China. So it really dramatically, quickly establishes the stakes and the villain. Really incredibly well. That all of a sudden you got a fearful villain who has all these lieutenants around them that are in themselves formidable. And it's been established within the first 3 minutes of the movie what the stakes are. The stakes are for, the very heart of China itself. Yeah, so it's just I think for a DM, it is really valuable for any storyteller watching Mulan, the animated thing, just those first 10 minutes, I think are really valuable. Anyway, so that's thought. So then when planning out a session, I think it's really valuable to think, okay, well, what's the purpose of each of these scenes? And, we generally speaking in D&D, we generally have is it a role-playing scene or is it an action scene? That's
Yeah.
kind of the two big things, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the one that's in between, is it a suspense scene? So like a sneaking scene. And and then the role, so there's subdivisions of each one. Let's say that there's subdivisions. So action scenes, it could be sneaking, it could be fighting, it could be chasing. There's
Mm.
different action kind of scenes. Role playing scenes, there are different scenes for that as well. There are ones where we're establishing relationships, or ones that are breaking up relationships. There are ones that are finding information. So there's a whole bunch of different purposes for a role playing scene
Mm-hmm.
or for an action scene. But it's helpful to go into the planning knowing what is the purpose of the scene.
Okay. Sounds good.
And and my experience is going to be different from yours into how long each of those scenes take. How long do you find that an action scene usually takes?
Uh, for D&D, it's been a while. Um, I couldn't say. I mean, not too long. I mean, I've heard of ones that take the whole damn session. I do not want a whole damn session of fighting. Um, I don't know. Maybe out of character about takes about 10-20 minutes to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, and our yeah, I think it's really good to, as a DM, to figure out how long those do tend to take for the group and how long the attention lasts.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will love them and some people will tire of them. Same with role playing scenes. Some people love them and some people tire of them.
Yeah, I also find that sometimes the action scene will end up becoming a role playing scene because
That's what you'd hope.
instead of fighting, they decide to steal his weapon or something like that. And my players are weird. They end up, using their own weapon. No, what what happened one time? There was a fight with a pirate, and a fairy character decided they wanted his hat. So while everyone else was fighting the pirate, the fairy nicked off with his hat. So and then
Brilliant.
then they nicked off with his weapon, and then the pirate ended up naked, and it got really weird.
I really love what Dixon has just put in the chat in terms of a rough timing for combat.
Mm,
Maybe about 10 minutes per character per player, depending upon what. I think that's actually very accurate, Dixon.
yeah.
Yeah. For our Dice Legends main shows, I usually assume I usually assume 4 significant scenes an episode, a 3-hour episode.
Mm-hmm.
I usually assume a significant role playing portion, which will take about 45 minutes, and a significant action portion, which will take 45 minutes. We have 4 players, so that works pretty perfectly with Dixon's maths there.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. See, I'm not a very organized person, so hearing that there should be so many scenes and you should know how long they, and I'm kind of like, oh, okay, right.
But it doesn't have to be as structured as that at all. The way that you've done it, where you that you pull out, you start someplace and you just see how it goes. That's brilliant. Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
I often don't, when I'm doing games, especially non-streamed ones, I don't have things necessarily as clearly delineated. So I'll show you. This is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it very well. I'll just show you. It'll be a bit of a spoiler if I do that one. It's a good example, though. I wonder if I can find one that's um, an older example. Here we go. Episode 9. I had planned that there would be 4 scenes.
Yeah.
In episode 9, the first one would be negotiations. Next would be a captive thing. That's not actually a good example either. Unfortunately, the one that I don't want to spoil is probably the best example I've got in this book. But yeah. So anyway, for our stream is a bit different from when I'm doing normal games with friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
In that, for a stream, I usually do have things a little bit more structured, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Makes sense. Whatever works, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if your players are prone to going off and doing things you've not even planned for.
That's right. That's right. And it is actually possible to have an entire session being combat and for everyone to love it. And it's
Yeah.
entirely possible for a session to be completely role playing and everyone to love it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the world building, we've covered locations
Mm-hmm.
and NPCs, and is there anything in particular else that you think we should cover?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think this is a good basis to start with, just making a campaign. Um, Anything else would just be, getting down into the details. What about the viewers? Do you have any questions or you want to ask, or anything you would like us to, have Vahid focus on a bit more? Anyone? What I'm doing is I'm coming at this from the point of view of I will probably be running a mini D&D campaign at some point on the stream.
Cool.
So, having not run anything other than mostly the published stuff, and not being very good at running one shots, I thought it would be good to, have a master on to help
Very
me
kind.
with that. Oh, well, you dungeon master. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I think one shots do require particular planning. I think a special type of planning.
Yeah, I've really only done one shots in terms of Monster of the Week, and I tend to over plan for that. I don't plan much if it's a campaign for Monster of the Week, but if it's a one shot, because I know I have a limited amount of time to actually get this all done, it's also the most anxiety, causing to make
Yeah,
sure everything happens within that time. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. That can be tricky.
Do you have any tips for me specifically for trying to come up with this mini campaign? I mean, obviously it's going to be a small location, probably at the foot of some hills,
Nice.
um, that kind of thing. The idea I have in mind is that the characters will start out not being heroes at all, not having classes. They'll have backgrounds which might inform what class they might pick up along the way, but it really will be, hopefully by the end of the first session, everyone will have discovered their class, whether it's
I like
accepting a
that
deal
idea.
from someone or they just have picked up a sword and found they've been pretty good at using it, so they've become a fighter kind of thing.
That sounds cool,
Yeah,
Sero.
I want to do that. So they start out as a random everyday NPC type, and they become a hero by the end of the mini campaign. That's what I
That's
want to
cool.
do.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds great, And if you have the scale nice and intimate to begin with,
Mm.
then I think intimate's a good word rather than, small, because the stakes of one person dying is still pretty significant. Yeah, I think that sounds cool. And that's a nice nice story for each character to discover their path as well, isn't it?
So, because I'm very big on the whole, the character is key, and how they interact with everyone else around them. And that's just why I really like the role play. So, them interacting with their other party members as well as them interacting with the NPCs around them. So, I
Yeah,
really want to see that character interaction and growth. And
yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
encourage in the campaign. So, what tips or advice have you got for me there in terms of building this campaign? And then after that, I think we've got some questions from Dixon, which are
Yeah,
slightly out of the topic of creating a campaign. But
that's
yeah.
cool. So I think for creating a campaign, if it's a mini campaign, then I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to establish really quickly what the motivation is for the characters, what the characters need to be doing.
Yeah.
Um, in a big massive campaign, it can be sandbox, right?
Yeah.
And you can go wherever you want, and that's cool. If it's a mini campaign, it needs to be a little bit more directive. The players need to know right from the beginning what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
They can choose to leave the path, you know,
Yeah.
but I think you need to forecast to build in something that makes it really clear what the motivator is for them to get up and become heroes and to do, you know? And classic ones are kidnappings or an impending attack or someone's gone missing, you know, something
Mm-hmm.
that's a clear threat but still a small still intimate are, you know, goods kind of stakes. And then from that just build up the environment that it takes place in, key locations, some key non-playing characters, and I think and then it pretty much writes itself once you have the characters build their heroes.
Mm-hmm. Cool. 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 We have a question from Dixon that is specific. Um, how no, in creating the campaign, how do you choose the music? Because obviously you use music in Dice Legends.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I see, yeah, Dixon's got a few questions there, which is great. Thank you, Dixon. So um, uh, this comes back to my background because I've said like 17 times that I've worked in the TV industry in this stream alone. But the main thing I do is I'm a composer. I compose music for TV and for film and stuff like that, but mostly TV. And so I've written the music, and I specifically wanted the music to reflect the setting. So then what we do is um, we have a whole bunch of music tracks that have already been made, and we have our sound guy that live that knows the palette of music really well and can then knows how to choose which piece of music for the type of scene that we have. So that's how the music works. So I created it, but Declan, our sound guy, chooses which of those pieces gets used.
Yeah. Except for when you ask him specifically for that yucky music or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Because I think that's
Um,
what impressed Dixon yesterday during the stream was how you were using the music to help set the scene and the tone of what was going on.
yeah, and I think that especially if you're doing a chase scene, I think it really helps as a DM to have some music, especially for chase scenes. It really pushes things along.
Yeah.
Chase scene feels flat without chase music for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. That goes back to his other question. I've noticed you often use music to speed up combat or make sure players are acting instead of spending too much time thinking. Is that an idea you brought from your TV background?
So right at that's brilliant. Thank you, Dixon. The right from the beginning, when setting this up, I warned the players that um, for our show, we wouldn't be spending a long time. You have to be ready.
Yeah.
As a player, you have to be ready because it's a show. It's not like if it's a game at home when I'm playing with my brother and friends, we get out the book and we scroll through and find what spell it is, and because we've got time. And we don't mind if we're playing for 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever. But for a show like ours, which has a 3 hour window, we do want it to be pacey.
Yeah.
And so they even if they don't know what they're doing straight away within the first handful of seconds, I go 5, 4, 3, and if they don't, then their character freezes and they don't get an action. So that's and that is really because of that kind of TV background. In the length of shots in most, if you average the number of shots in most kind of blockbuster Hollywood movies, they say that the average shot length is now 1 second. No, 1 minute. 1 minute. Sorry, 1 minute. That's not right. That's not right. I've messed that up. I'm gonna have to find that out. It's really short. It's not 1 second, but it's definitely not 1 minute. It's much longer.
Yeah,
Anyway,
minutes does seem a bit long for.
No, that's definitely not right. I'll have to look that up. See what it is.
Yeah. So another question is, how do you personally deal with early character death in a one shot? Oh my gosh.
So, how many early character deaths have we had in one shots an hour? It depends on the one shot. If we did a player versus player one, which was really fun. And the mechanic that the DM used in that is that this is a PvP thing, which is quite different. And that the players came back as zombified versions of themselves, and that was fun. Because then you can still play, right? You're still doing something. There's a mechanic in a game called Paranoia, which is really fun, where when you die, you come back as a clone of yourself, but a little less.
Yeah.
You don't have quite the same skills.
Yeah.
So that's some. But I haven't had to deal with that. In a significant way yet. We have had character deaths in one shots, but they've all been satisfyingly near the end of the episodes.
Yeah. That's not actually something I've had to worry about, Dixon, but thank you for now putting it in my head to worry about next time. You're so awesome. Let's see, what else should we talk about? Well, if anyone else has any other questions, that'll be great. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap up soon. I do want to say that Vahid will be returning next week to play in his first ever Monster of the Week one shot, which
It's gonna be fun.
Which I'm thankfully not running. I've got Adam from Role Players back to run a one shot for him, and it'll be an episode of Time Jail for those of you who are familiar with Adam's work at all. Basically, we are people pulled out of different times and places and end up in a time jail together because we've done something wrong, and it's up to us to work together or not to escape or not. So it's not the typical Monster of the Week, but it's pretty much mostly improvised on the spot by everyone, including the person running it. So yeah, we'll see.
And our characters are the polar opposites to each other, aren't they?
Well, I can't quite remember what your character is, but my character is going to be a horse. So
Exactly. Yeah, and mine is I've gone for a divine. So I'm this kind of, super buffy kind of thing, and you're a horse.
Dixon has said a horse. Dixon, you're actually familiar with this horse. This horse is called Dios. I'm just going to wait for him to go, oh my god, because he'll know who that is. But yeah. Oh no! Not the reaction I was expecting. Then it's not a horse. It's a horse. That's right. But my character doesn't have that accent, so I won't be saying horse. Or yeah. My horse's usual rider has a interesting southern type of accent. So he
Nice.
doesn't say horse. He attempts to say horse. So yes, if anyone's familiar with my podcast Regate and Wolf, which is a Monster of the Week actual play podcast, you'll know all about these characters that I'm talking about. No, Dixon Ollie's not going to be there at all. The other guests will be Susanna Lewis, who was on the stream a couple of weeks ago. She'll be there as a character as well. And Rosie will finally get some time to be on the stream as well. I've been promising him for ages, but his schedule doesn't always allow it. So as soon as this opportunity came up, I immediately went and got him. I know nothing about his character other than he's apparently bald. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, so that'll be fun. We're looking forward to it and
It'll be good fun.
See how Vahid goes. I'm sure it'll be.
Yeah, true.
Fun. Yeah, it shouldn't be too. I was going to say it shouldn't be too chaotic, but you never know. I mean, we've got a horse and we've got a Rosie, so anything goes. Yeah, Dixon says you can never tell what Rosie's going to do. He's 100% a Chaos Goblin.
Yes, yeah. I get that impression just from the chat that we've had setting up the game.
Yeah. We'll try and keep it PG. I've told everyone to try and keep it PG, so we'll see how we go.
See how you go, yeah. Cool. Hey, well, this has been fun, Sarah.
It has been. It's been really helpful, fun, and informative for me and for my viewers as well. So thank you very much for coming on, Vahid, and I look forward to next week.
Yes, indeed. It's going to be a lot of fun. I have no idea what I'm doing, but yeah.
That's okay. It is basically roleplay driven. If you just say what you're going to do, act it out, and if you need to roll something, Adam will let you know. That's basically how Monster of the Week works. So,
cool.
Yeah. A bit like D&D, but less dice rolling. So, and only the 2 dice. So, okay. Thank you for being here. Dixon has also said thank you for being here. All that remains for us to do now is to wave awkwardly at the camera while I find the right button in OBS to put up the goodbye screen.
Okay, I've commenced the awkward waving.
Okay.
Catch you guys later.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.